How do you declare a river a myth if it was once the backbone of human civilization? What if proving Saraswati's existence doesn't just rewrite Indian history, but shatters everything we think we know about the world civilizations? What if the Vedic people didn't just thrive here, but spread their knowledge across the ancient world? Because if Saraswati really existed, it means the so-called Hindu myths weren't myths at all. And what if burying that river wasn't just about erasing a river, but erasing the world's oldest civilization?
पावका ना सरस्वती आजे भी वजनीवती यज्ञम वस्तु ध्याय वसु.
This is the very first time Saraswati is mentioned in the Rig Veda. Book 1, Chapter 3, Verse 10. Not just as a stream or a symbol, but as a living, roaring river full of wisdom, power, and abundance. And from here, she flows across 72 verses in the Rig Veda, 5 in the Samved, 12 in the Yajurved, and 10 in the Atharvaved. But something strange happens. As the Vedas progress, Saraswati starts fading from the mighty mothers of flood to a quiet stream, to nothing. A river that once gave birth to a civilization suddenly vanished from the pages of history. What you're about to discover might change the way you look at our history forever. So let's begin with what we can prove. Satellite images from ISRO show a massive dry riverbed cutting across Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, and into Pakistan's Cholistan desert. It follows the same path as the Ghaggar-Hakra, a river with no glacier source today, but once strong enough to carry Himalayan meltwater. And this isn't new. In the 1990s, NASA's Landsat satellites captured the same channel, a hidden river wide enough to rival the Indus. Since then, geologists across the world, from Delhi to Denver, have agreed that a mighty river once flowed here. Along this dried path lies over 90 ancient settlements, including Rakhigadi, Bhirana, Kalibangan. Many of these are older than Mohenjo-daro or Harappa. But what do they have in common? They were all built along this lost river. According to the Archaeological Survey of India, scholars like Dr. B.R. Mani, some of these go back to 7500 BC, with signs of farming, fire altars, drainage system, and even scripts like marking that predates the Harappan seals. And a joint study by IIT Kanpur and ISRO in 2006 confirmed that this river was glacially fed, flowing strong until about 2000 BC, when tectonic shifts and climate change began to dry it up. So no, the question isn't whether Saraswati existed. That's settled. The real question is, why was she erased? To answer that, we have to go back to the text that first spoke her name, the Rig Veda. In Mandal 1, Suk 3, Saraswati appears for the first time. She wasn't mentioned in passing. She was placed at the center, invoked in rituals, praised as Vajabhya, the bringer of richness, and Dhyavahu, the nurturer of wealth. And she wasn't just worshipped, she was mapped. In the Nadi Stuti hymn, Saraswati is listed between the Yamuna and the Satluj, putting her right in the heart of northern West India. And even the Mahabharata speaks of Saraswati passing through Kurukshetra and then disappearing underground and reappearing. What these texts describe, modern science confirms. And as we move from the Rig Veda to the Yajurved and then the Atharvaved, Saraswati begins to fade from a mighty river to a quiet name. By the Brahmanas and Upanishads, she is slipping beneath the sand. One verse from Jaiminya Brahmana describes Saraswati as Upamanjana Saraswati, means she vanished into the desert. It wasn't a metaphor, it was memory. Now imagine when that happens to Ganga, a river we worship as a goddess, a river that defines our culture, prayers, and our very identity. One day, the Ganga will dry up, maybe thousands or 5,000 years from now. And then future historians will call her a myth, a fictional river that never existed. That's what happened to Saraswati, a river that once defined a civilization erased, not just from land, but from memory. But she didn't disappear from the people's heart. She lived on, in rituals, in folklores, in temple offerings, not as a legend, but as a presence. She wasn't lost. She was buried under sand, under silence, under politics. And that's when I went searching. A few months ago, I visited Kasauli, a quiet hill town in Himachal. I wasn't looking for peace, I was looking for answers. Inside a small museum, I met a geologist named Dr. Ritesh Arya, a man who spent his life studying ancient water systems. He didn't try to convince me. He showed me fossils, borewell maps, ground scans. Every layer of evidence pointed to one conclusion. A river once flowed right where Saraswati was said to be in Vedas. And then he said something that I will never forget. This isn't a geological debate. It's a historical cover-up. And suddenly, everything clicked. Why did Western historians call Saraswati a myth, even when the evidence was all around us? Because her existence broke the timeline they had built. Colonial historians, especially Max Miller, claim that Vedas were written around 1500 BC by outsiders who came into India. And since they believed Saraswati had dried up by then, they said that Vedic people couldn't have known her. So she was erased. Because if Saraswati was real and still flowing during the Rig-Vedic period, then it means something big. The Vedic civilization wasn't later. It was already here. That would mean the Rig Veda wasn't written after the Indus Valley. It was written within it, or even before it. It would mean the Vedas didn't come from outside. They were born here. It would mean that Bharatvasis were spread all across Europe and brought civilization to the West. Now think about it. The Vedas were composed along the Saraswati, a river that's now proven to have existed right here in Bharat. Then how could Sanskrit have come from outside? We keep calling them Indo-European or Indo-Aryan languages, but that's wrong. They are not Indo-Aryan at all, but simply Vedic language that spread outwards from the Saraswati civilization. Sanskrit emerged here alongside the Vedic rituals and hymns. Then how did it suddenly become a foreign import? It didn't. We didn't inherit Sanskrit. We exported it. And all those so-called Indo-Aryan connections we see in Persia, Europe and beyond, they aren't coincidences. They're echoes of a civilization that once thrived along the Saraswati and then spread its language, its culture, its gods and its stories to the rest of the world. Now, if you want to know more about how these connections were formed, from the Yadus in the Mathura to the Pakhtuns in Afghanistan, go watch my previous video on Arya invasion theory. Because Saraswati is the missing link, the proof that Vedic civilization wasn't isolated. It was a launchpad that carried out culture across the ancient world. When I started researching Saraswati, it quickly became clear. This wasn't just a river, it was a timeline. Geologists studied the Ghaggar-Hakra channel, now identified as Saraswati. Their findings, the riverbed dates back to over 200,000 years, long before modern humans even existed. But I wasn't looking for rocks, I was looking for people. Studies by CSIR, NGRI, IIT Kanpur, ISRO and BARC confirmed that this river carried glacial melt from the Himalayas until around 4000 BC. But there is more. Dr. Rajesh Agnihotri and Chammayal pushed the timeline further. Saraswati was flourishing around 10,000 BC, maybe even earlier. That's long before Egypt, Sumer or Mesopotamia. And it explains that why we find over 90 archaeological sites along her banks. Rakhigadi, Bhairana, Kalibangan, Banavali, all showing signs of city planning, fire altars, water management, and early script. And that's just what we can see. According to archaeologist Disha Aluwalia, hundreds of sites remain buried, hidden beneath towns in Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. What we have uncovered so far, it's barely 10% of what could still be out there. A river, once dismissed as a myth, may hold the key to a civilization older than anything we have been taught. If Saraswati was thriving around 10,000 BC, then the Vedic civilization was too. And if that's true, we need to ask, how far back does Bharat really go? Because while geology helps us trace Saraswati's body, astronomy helps us understand its soul. The people who looked up at the stars and wrote them into the hymns. The Rig Veda isn't just spiritual poetry. It holds some of the most precise sky references in any ancient text, describing planetary alignments, solstices, eclipses. Modern astronomers have simulated those patterns, and many match the skies of 10,000 BC. Take the work of T.P. Verma and P.V. Vartak, who analyzed the sky positions described in Vedic verses. Some of them, like the Traitya Brahmana's reference to star Ajikpada, Purva Bhadrapada, rising due east, only happened around 10,000 BC. It hasn't repeated since. The Shatpada Brahmana mentions Kritika, the Pleiades, rising in the east, a detail that places the text around 3000 BC. And then there's the Mahabharata. In the Sabha Parva, the position of Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and lunar eclipse are described in astonishing details. Based on that, researchers like Dr. Vartak and Neeleshok calculated the timing of the Kurukshetra war to around 5561 BC. Even the Ramayana includes a moment when Ram is born under a rare alignment. 5 planets exalted in their own signs. Multiple simulations place this around 12,000 BC. Now ask yourself, were these just poetic metaphors or actual memories of the sky, recorded by people who were there to witness it? Because astronomy doesn't lie. And when multiple ancient texts, written centuries apart, describe alignments that match prehistoric sky patterns, it can't be a coincidence. Now let's tie this back to Saraswati. When we line up the geological data with the astronomical references, the glacier fed Ghaggar-Hakra from 12,000 to 7,500 BC, the Rig Vedic hymns describing star positions from 10,000 BC. Everything aligns. The people who composed these hymns, they weren't nomads. They were astronomers, builders, priests, a civilization grounded in science, ritual, and memory. And that's where most historians got it wrong. They confused the date of writing with the date of origin. Because the Vedas weren't written first. They were remembered, chanted, and passed down perfectly preserved, word for word, for millennia. No manuscripts, no monuments, just memory. But the West didn't understand that. So they measured us by what they could dig up: stone, clay, inscriptions. But the Vedic civilization, it wasn't written in stone. It was etched in consciousness. That's why Saraswati was erased. Not because she didn't exist, but because her existence shattered the timeline. It forced a rewrite of world history, placing Bharat, not the West, as the cradle of civilization. But even if the river vanished, her memory remained in the verses, in the ruins, in us. We have just scratched the surface of what it really means when we say that Saraswati was real. This video was about proving her existence and exposing the conspiracy behind burying it. But this is just the beginning. We have already explored Vedic connection with other civilizations, from the Mayans to Persia, from Turkey to Nazca, and all the way to America. But there's so much more. And now I need your support. Subscribe if you want to go deeper. Comment below which civilizational connection you would like to explore next. Egypt, Sumer, but at the end of the day, they were all connected by one thread: Sanatan Dharma, the universal principle of living. This is it from my side. This is Harry signing off. Stay curious.